Welcome to Module 4 of the MELI Unit's Strategic Planning course. In this module, we will introduce you to performance monitoring plans and how they can help you develop and measure your indicators. Let's get started. What is a performance monitoring plan? A performance monitoring plan, or PMP, outlines a program's indicators and their constituent parts, including detailed descriptions and data collection questions. Using a tool like a PMP can help you develop all the necessary elements of your indicators. Let's go back to this visual. In previous modules, we talked through goals, objectives, and indicators. When working with PMPs, we add one last level, which is the data source. Every indicator should have one corresponding data source. The PMP itself then shows how those data sources connect back up to our objectives. Here's an example of an indicator within a performance monitoring plan. As you can see, it has seven major components, each of which we will dive into in more detail. Starting with indicator title, which is the full and complete name of the performance indicator. For example, percent of participants who have more confidence in their ability to have an impact in their home country. Our second component is the definition, which is where we clarify all terms necessary, provide detail on how to calculate the data collected to measure the change expected, and include any disaggregations that need to be reported for the indicator. You can also think of the definition as the place where you provide all information necessary to ensure that the indicator is specific. For example, you might decide that you need to define participant, which would be a person who has directly participated in an ECA exchange program, and host country, the country in which a program participant resides. Here, we also specify that data collected should be disaggregated by gender and age. Up next, we have baseline and target. The baseline is the value of a performance indicator before implementation, while the target is the specific planned level of result to be achieved within an explicit time frame. Baselines and targets are part of how we ensure our indicators are achievable. For example, we might set a baseline of 85% and a target of 95%. Before we move on to the other PMP components, let's talk a bit more about baselines and targets, starting with the 4 ways we can establish baselines. First is by starting from 0. We do this when the baseline does not need to be established because you can confidently say it will be 0. Generally, indicators that measure an output of a program, things that the program produces, will have a baseline of 0. Baselines can also be pre-existing. This happens when a baseline was already established based on prior data that were available or collected for the ongoing project. This will generally occur in cases where a program's activities are being continued. For instance, if a program was conducted for a second year. When a pre-existing baseline is used, that baseline should be qualified with the period of time. For instance, program year 1 data. Baselines can also be established through data collection. In some cases where the baseline will not be 0, and there are no existing data with which to establish a baseline, the baseline can be established through new data collection. In these cases, data collection for baselines should happen before implementation of activities begins. And finally, baselines can be conducted on a rolling basis. This occurs in cases when a program is not implemented at the same time for all participants, meaning the baseline should be conducted on a rolling basis as the program is implemented. For instance, if a program is implemented in phases, data collected in each phase will serve as the baseline for the subsequent phase of the program. Let's move on to targets, specifically types of targets. Targets may express quantity, so how much, quality, how good, or efficiency, least cost. When developing your targets, there may be guidance for targets within program documentation or from program administrators. In lieu of those, it may be useful to analyze progress of other programs or of similar past projects. Previous evaluations can also be a source of information for setting targets. You may also be able to look at underlying historical trends related to the indicator value over time. Is there a trend, whether it's upward or downward, that can be drawn from existing reports, records, or statistics? The judgment of specialists can be used to establish what is possible or feasible with respect to a particular indicator in a given context. Colleagues that are familiar with similar programs might also have valuable insight into what can be expected from such a program. And one should also review existing or relevant research findings. Targets can also be established by benchmarking, which is the process of comparing or checking the progress of similar projects or programs. Now, getting back to our PMP, our next component is the data source and question. This is where we specify how the data will be obtained, such as a survey, through observation, conducting an interview, etc. And the mandatory question linked to that data collection. This is especially important if data are being collected by multiple sites, partners, etc., to help ensure data consistency and validity. For example, your data source might be a survey of participants, so self-reported data, and your question might be, as a result of your program participation, how has your confidence in each of the following changed? And then maybe there's a list of options that survey respondents can choose from. And our final two PMP components are when to collect and the entity responsible. When to collect specifies the point in time in which data should be collected. You can think of this as how you clarify the timeliness of your indicator. And entity responsible specifies who bears responsibility for data collection. For example, you might indicate that data should be collected through a post-program survey, which will be done by, let's say, the Millie unit. And that's it for our module on performance monitoring plans. And that's actually our last module in this course. So when you're ready, you can head back to the training overview and take the course assessment.